It's time to step up and take care of the timing belt on the Forester XT. Welcome back to the Auto Obsessive Garage. Chadwick with you again for another installment of Project OG FXT. And we're stepping it up this week for sure because we're going to tackle that timing belt water pump job. So that's a pretty big job. We got to get it in there and get it done. It is an interference engine, so a little more stress than usual, but that's what makes us really work, right? That little fear in the back of our minds. But I'm going to show you guys, walk you through as best I can to show you how to do this timing belt job, which is going to be similar to just about every 2 liter and 2.5 liter dual overhead cam Subaru engine out there. So a lot of shared stuff there. There's going to be little things that are different, but for the most part, this would be very helpful for anyone looking for a kind of guided video on how to do it. And I'll show you guys some of my tips and tricks to get this job done. But enough talking, let's get in the garage and get some work done. All right, as we dig into the timing belt job, first things we want to do, disconnect our battery. We can actually remove it if we're going to need that extra room. Not sure if we're going to or not, but let's go ahead and disconnect it for now. We also have to get the coolant out of the system. So go ahead and drain the cooling system via the radiator. We will be pulling the entire radiator, so that coolant's got to go. Okay, we're about to drain the coolant on the Forester. You can see the little pepcock here at the end. In the name of doing it nice and cleanly for once in my life, I'm going to hook a hose to that to drain it into my catch pan, and that way I'm not spraying coolant everywhere. Let's try that approach. So I had an old length of silicone hose laying around, put it over the pepcock drain. I'm going to put this far end into my catch pan and then turn that pepcock and drain her out. So I've removed the pepcock. It didn't work exactly as planned. It is draining into my pan though, and as soon as I pop that radiator cap, this will come out like a storm of water after, a torrential downpour. So let's go ahead and pop that and see how much of a mess we can do. I probably should have just done the lower radiator hose like I usually do, but whatever. Here's the radiator cap. You can loosen this, and we're probably gonna make a big mess. Oh yeah. This looks perfect. Yeah, this will be a fun mess to pick up. Now we'll let her drain out, and then we'll clean it up and start pulling all the radiator out. Next time I'm just doing that lower hose. All right, we want to disconnect all our hoses, so our coolant overflow hose. Some people remove this coolant overflow tank. You can actually pull the radiator up with it. So I'm probably just going to do this, but we need to disconnect obviously our hoses and these little secondary lines that come off the radiator and the coolant overflow. So we'll just pull those. Now, when you're doing this kind of work, you're going to inspect your hoses along the way. If you see anything that looks jeopardized, worn, any cracking, or obviously any leaks, go ahead and replace that hose at this time. It's never a bad idea to periodically do that. You have to remember too, you have fans, 2 fans on this radiator setup. So you're going to reach down and undo those. Each fan has its own connector going to it. Pretty easy just to reach down there and unplug those. That always happens. Yeah. All right, bottom hose is disconnected. Both fans are disconnected. Looks like we're good. We got these 2 little brackets at the top, which I believe are 12 millimeter. Let's double check our radiator should be free now. Oh yeah. Cool, so I'm just trying to shake out some more coolant. All right, should be just as simple as picking it up and pulling the whole unit out. There we go, radiator out. Next we can remove this alternator cover. 2 10mm bolts hold it on. Let's start with removing the alternator belt. You're going to go ahead and loosen this 12mm right here on the front, the tensioner. Get it nice and finger loose. Come over here, loosen this 12. Now you can loosen this guy. And this, as we pull this out, walk this huge bolt out, you're gonna see this belt start to get slack. See that? We're going to replace all these belts because there is no sense in getting in here to do a time belt and leaving your accessory belts on. So there's our AC belt. I always like to inspect. Not bad. Pretty similar deal for the AC belt. Going to come down here, loosen this 12 down here. It might be just out of frame, but it's the lower bolt. Get that nice and loosey-goosey. 6-inch extension here. Same kind of the top one. We're going to loosen this up. You can see the pulley actually coming up now, and that's actually putting slack on our belt. Pretty cool system. It's going to be the opposite for installation too, just a obvious tip there. And there's our AC belt. Also, looking really good too. Wow. Before you embark on the timing belt job, there are a couple tools that are gonna make this job a lot easier. Here we go. They're both made by Company 23, which does some amazing specialty tooling for Subaru products. This first box here is a cam holding tool. And the reason you're gonna need this is because the driver's side cam, the left side of the vehicle, once you remove the timing belt, it's gonna get out of time. Like 95% of the time, it has some tension on it and it'll spin, and that'll get your timing marks off and you'll have to reset it, which is annoying. It also helps for installing that new timing belt so the cam doesn't keep moving too, and you have to keep adjusting and starting over. This is a lifesaver, so I'd go ahead and advise using one of these. I've had something similar to this in the past, but this one's very nicely made and will hold that cam right in place. The other important tool you're gonna need is when you go to remove your harmonic balancer or crank pulley, you're gonna notice that thing likes to move. Now, this isn't uncommon. If you do a lot of timing belts like I do, you do need something to hold that crank in place. Even fifth gear and your friend stomping on the brakes might not be enough. So I really love these heavy-duty crank holding tools, again by Company 23. You can see it's very well made. Comes with all the hardware to attach it to your harmonic pulley. And you're gonna be using that. And you're gonna lock it in place, brace it up against something else in the engine bay. And then we are gonna crank. You can see I have a 22mm right on the crank bolt there. We're gonna use a 1/2-inch breaker bar and really lean on it once we get that holding tool in place. So that's what we're doing next. We're gonna get this crank pulley off the car. We've got our Company 23 crank holding tool in place. We're gonna slide our 22mm socket on there with a breaker bar and loosen that crank bolt. She takes a mighty lot of convincing, but it's good now. I used a 1/2-inch breaker bar. That seemed to do the trick. Should be able to turn her off by hand now. Pull that bolt free. Here's our crank bolt. You can see a little bit of thread locker on there. That certainly helped me out. But yep, here it goes. We should be able to just pull the crank pulley right off now. There's the crank pulley. You just need to kind of rock it back and forth a lot and it'll slide right off. You can see there's a keyway, so it only goes one way when you go to reinstall. But now it's going to be time to remove this timing belt covers, see what's underneath there. And then the next step after that is to go ahead and put the crank bolt back in, get the engine to top dead center, and I'll show you how to do that with all your timing marks. And then we'll go ahead and replace the timing belt. A little tough to get an angle pointing down in here, but your timing cover is 3 sections. You've got 2 sides and a center. I like to do the sides first, then remove the center. It's held on by 10mm bolts, so super easy. Make sure you find all those. I am gonna remove this belt tensioner right here. 12mm bolts will pull that right off. All right, belt tensioner removed. Now we can start hitting all the 10mm bolts around the timing cover. Driver's side timing cover removed with 4 identical bolts. All right, passenger side cover off. Only 3 bolts on that side, folks. And here's the central timing belt cover. You're gonna have 8 bolts holding that on. Next up, we're gonna reinstall the crank bolt, but not all the way down, just enough so we can turn the engine. 22mm socket again on there. Turn it with a ratchet to get all your marks to top dead center. Now to line up your timing marks on this engine, on the 2.5 dual overhead cam turbo Subaru engine, I'll show you what you're looking at. The first one being this line right here. Let's see if I can zoom in and help you guys out. You should see that little line on top of the crank pulley. And that lines up with a little mark. It's hard to see just under here. The other marks you're looking at is every cam has a line to mark up with. I'm sorry about the view here, it's a little tricky with lighting. You can see on the top there's a line there. Straight up should line up with this on the back of the timing plate. Same with the sides. There's double lines on each cam and they should touch in the middle where the 2 cams do come together. So if you see that on the passenger side and driver side, you know you're in alignment. It's the exact same thing over here. You can see the cam mark right there and it lines up with the backing plate perfectly. So we are at top dead center now. Now what you don't want to do is go ahead and pull that timing belt off right now, because what will happen is these cams, left hand side of the vehicle, the driver's side, are going to move and then you're going to be out of timing again. No panic mode if that happens. You can easily set that again, but what you're going to want to do is use that Company 23 locking tool, cam locking tool, to secure those cams on that side of the engine. That way we're going to loosen the tensioner down there, release, put some slack on the belt, and we'll be able to pull it off, and this engine will be locked at top dead center, which is how you want it to be when you're doing a timing belt job. Let's go ahead and install that locking tool at this time. Since the Forester XT has this plate that has a cam seal integrated into it on the end of the camshaft, you can't simply put the locking tool on. You have to remove that cover, that shiny aluminum cover. To do so, you can just remove 3 8mm bolts and use a small pry tool, and that cover should pop off, revealing the hex where you need to lock the cam locking tool in. Let me see if it'll just come off. There we go. So, yep, there you go. That's what it looks like. You can see the cam seal integrated into this little cap. And now we can use that cam lock tool. To tighten down the cam tool, you have to have a 19mm wrench and a 17mm wrench. I'm using a socketing gear wrench here, or a ratcheting wrench here, to make it easier, but you're gonna turn this to tighten it. The 19 in the back holds it in place, and you wanna tighten this down pretty good. If you fail to tighten that down, when you release it, the tension can be enough to spin the tool and get you back out of alignment. So make sure you snug all of that down. But our engine is locked securely now, and then we're gonna take off that crank bolt and pop this timing belt. Okay, so we've got all our marks lined up. We're still at top dead center. We're gonna pull that crank bolt out since we don't need that installed any longer. Our cam lock tool is in place. It's time to pull the timing belt off at this time. We are gonna replace all of our pulleys, our idler pulleys and tensioners. First thing I wanna do is remove this one pulley down here. This should put enough slack on the belt to remove it completely. Then we can set about removing everything else. I'm pretty sure these are all 14 mil if I remember correctly. You're gonna have a ton of slack on that timing belt once you pull this one off, and still spins really freely, but we're gonna go ahead and replace all these anyway. Oh, that's right. There are a couple little guides. I always forget this on this one. We have right here above the crank pulley, or where the crank pulley was, this guide needs to come out to remove the timing belt. And there's a tiny little one over here that uses hex keys. Let me show you guys. Forgot about those. I think these are only on the manuals. So you can see that kind of brass back there. Yep, right on top of the timing belt. That needs to be removed. I think you use hex keys to do that. I think they're 5 mil if my memory is correct. And then obviously a little bit larger one right there above the crank. So let's go ahead and pull those off. We need to do that at this time to remove that timing belt. Now we should be able to pull that timing belt off. As long as those cams don't move, we're happy. You can see the tensioner moving freely over here. Timing belt removed from the Forester XT.